Bienvenidos a todos. Welcome, comadres and friends. I'm the project manager for Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. And on behalf of our leadership team, it is a pleasure to welcome you tonight's podcast as we celebrate our 20th anniversary. For 2 decades, we have had the privilege of championing Latino authors, connecting readers across the country, and building a vibrant, supportive literary community. Your enthusiasm and continued support have made this journey possible, and we're excited for many more years of sharing powerful stories and unforgettable voices together. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us through our Twitter chat at Read Latino Lit, and we're glad you're part of the conversation. Tonight, we are thrilled to celebrate National Poetry Month and feature 2 outstanding poets. Join me in welcoming Kimberly Vargas Agnese and Jose Hernandez Diaz. Please join us now in welcoming them. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself on mute during the program. You're welcome to keep your video on if you'd like. We recommend using speaker view, though gallery view works just as well. And if you have a question, please share them in the chat and we'll do our best to address them during the discussion. And now to begin, let's take a moment to reflect on the history of our book club. Nydia? Nydia?
Bienvenidos, comadres and friends. My name is Nydia Marcela, and I'm the book club membership coordinator. Our book club began in July of 2004 in the apartment of Maria Ferrer here in New York City. But after a brief pause, Nora Comstock reimagined and relaunched the organization nationwide. Her vision was to promote Latino authors, bring our community into bookstores, and support our writers. In October of 2006, we began hosting teleconferences, and now in our 20th year anniversary, we continue to share works by Latino authors with book lovers everywhere. Our book club and podcast are designed to encourage everyone, not just Latinos, to read more Latino literature, explore diverse cultural perspective, and gain deeper insight into Latino roots and heritage. We are creating a space where readers can explore the rich inner world of Latino writers through their written work. We currently have book clubs in 12 cities across different time zones, and we invite you to join a local chapter that fits your schedule. If your city isn't represented, we welcome you to help on starting a new club in your area. For more information, you can visit our website, latinolit.com. I will put that in the chat. So spread the word and invite others to join our literary community. Okay, Comadre Karen, take it away.
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our April 2026 podcast. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator, and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our first interview is with Kimberly Vargas Agnese. KADUPUL FLOWER received advanced praise endorsement from United States Poet Laureate Emeritus Juan Felipe Herrera, Young People's Poet Laureate Emeritus Margarita Engo, and California State Poet Laureate Lee Herrick. KADUPUL FLOWER appeared on the 2025 CLMP list for Hispanic Heritage Month and has been commended by the internationally acclaimed Permaculture magazine as well as the Latin American Review of Books. Her full-length collection, Red String on a Saguaro Cactus, was named a finalist for the 2022 Andres Montoya Poetry Prize, awarded biannually by the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame. A former creative writing instructor, literacy coach, youth pastor, and special education teacher, Kimberly makes her home in the smoggy California Central Valley. She spends her time cultivating a young food forest called Meadow Arc, praying and writing advocacy poetry. Interviewing Kimberly is Maria Perez Bustillo, whose poetry and fiction appears in Mom's Egg, LP2 Voices, Caribbean Review, The Poet's Table Book, Anthology 2000 to 2024, among others. Back to El Dorado, her coming-of-age Latina story is available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. She is Professor Emerita from College of New Rochelle in Hispanic Literature and a coordinator at LP2 program at GCUNY. Take it away, Comadre Maria.
Hola, everybody. Beautiful to be here. And well, I'm so happy to be interviewing Kimberly. Hi, Kimberly. Kimberly?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Okay, so here I am in New York, and you are in Fresno, California. And I think the thing that really just got me is the cover of your book with that word, okay? And I had never seen that word before. And the cover is beautiful.
Thank you.
So I wonder if you could tell us why do you have this for your title?
Yeah, I've got a little story. I've got some stuff written down. Years ago, when my daughter was sitting in the hall and I was in the bathroom, she said, "You have so many poems on your blog, Mom. Maybe it's time to start thinking about getting a chapbook published." And I sighed because it was so sweet of her to think that a publisher would be interested in my poems, but also because I thought that breaking into print with poetry was so competitive that it would be impossible. So I kind of patted her on the head and told her that if she wanted to, she could try to get my poems published. And to my not me, not me. She began to, and to my surprise, she began to send them off to literary journals who actually wanted to publish them. That was a big surprise. At that point, she and I became a team. In spite of the fact that she has over 100 articles published herself, she decided that she would invest her time into acting as my editor and literary agent. So she was actually the one who came up with the title of the book based on the poem KADUPUL FLOWER, which is in there, and which at its core is about the beauty, resilience, and dignity of all who live on the earth.
What a story to have an assistant right there.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
incredible.
And you mentioned the cover.
Yeah.
The cover, the story behind the cover is that we have, from the Chicano movement in the 1970s in Fresno, we have a lot of murals. And I wanted something that would feel like the murals. And so that is why it has the colors that it does. I wanted something beautiful breaking out of the dark, out of hard times. And so that's why the cover is like that.
Mm. As everybody can see, it just comes out at you, okay, like that. Tell me, you're talking about the flower and the color coming out of the dark.
Mm-hmm.
How did that, what dark are you talking about?
Well, I mean, to start, there's a lot of stereotypes here about Fresno. A lot of ideas that were, gangbangers or a lot of illegals or not very nice things. There's quite a bit of poverty here. We do have, farm workers here as well from Mexico, and have been under some threat with ICE. Of course, I wrote this after, but I guess I was referring to the poverty and wanting to show the beauty of the people that surround me. And that's what I was trying to do in the poetry in the book, and of the landscape as well.
I didn't quite understand the last part that you said there. Something about.
Yes, I wanted to show the beauty and the dignity and the resilience, the community that surrounds me. And in that, I include humans, but also the flora and the fauna that we have, the creatures, all of us.
Mm. Now, that's an amazing, encompassing world that you're talking about. So how did you go about organizing to write about this?
Hold on, let me find my notes there, please.
Because we're talking about the whole book. So there are 31 poems. And
yeah. So a lot of times for these types of questions, I'll be saying we, and it means my daughter and I.
Yeah.
So my daughter and I organized the collection around place against the backdrop of Fresno. We spent a hot, sweaty summer day under nothing more than an evaporative cooler. We're talking like 100, who knows, 106. It gets up to 100, and I think it's gotten up to 115 here. Mm-hmm. So it was really, really hot, and all we could do was sit. And so we decided to use that to sort many of my Fresno-based poems into a list. And after this, we pretended to be Simon Cowell. Do you know him? On America's Got Talent. We often play a little game with it. We get this huge list, and then we start to eliminate. And she's usually Simon. And we, tell the poems that they have to just buck up over it if they get eliminated. And then she goes ahead and she reads each poem aloud, and we listen for similarities so as to order them according to theme, or sometimes a little bit chronologically. Sometimes if one is longer, we might want a little shorter one just to watch for balance. And we also pay extra attention when she's reading through them to the first and last line of each poem. Because one of my daughter is just this huge shaper of how I write, and she really wants it to feel like a story. So that's what we aim for.
I think feel like a story, because right away when one starts the poem, the whole collection, right away, could you maybe read the first lines of the first poem?
Oh, let me get the book. You know what? My daughter puts it really big because my eyes are not good on this paper. So if I can read it, I will. If not, could I pull her in to read it?
Sure.
Okay, here's Stephanie. There you go.
Just the first 3 lines, right? And the title.
Okay, the first poem is Orange is Symbolic of Wirakuda. For $4.95, you can get 4 seed pods at Howard Johnson's. Put them next to a plate of spaghetti, stuff them into your pocket, whisper magic in the back seat of your mom's Nova.
Thank you. Right away, again, another word. that I'm not familiar with the title. Could you talk about that? Wirikuta?
Wirikuta?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tribe that is in Mexico, and it's where I found ancestry from. And so it was important. I've done a lot of research, and as I research, I notice things and elements and trying to reestablish identity.
So your identity, because of your last names, are different it seems like different identity.
Oh, hold on. Yeah, my identity is really maybe a little different for a somebody who would consider themselves a Chicano. Let me look, and I've got my story again and these papers. I'm afraid if I don't use my notes, I'll just kind of trip around. Is that one in? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Steffi. Okay. So I am a no sabo Chicano who barely knows Spanish, who for over 50 years checked the wrong boxes on both my and my children's ethnic and racial identity forms because of a lie on my birth certificate, a lie that was later explained to me by a family member who said she was trying to protect me from ever knowing that I was Mexican. Because he was Mexican, my biological father was never allowed to know of my existence. Because I was Mexican, I was not allowed to know about him until he was dead. Because I was Mexican, my grandparents never knew they had a granddaughter. Because I was Mexican, I wasn't allowed to choose my language or culture growing up. Because I was Mexican, I didn't learn about 5 of my siblings until a couple years ago. Because I was Mexican, I didn't know that I had relatives who are creative geniuses. Because I was Mexican, I didn't know that my father had to quit school when he was 16 so as to work in the fields with his family. Because I was Mexican, I didn't know that he also went on to be featured in a local newspaper for building an amazing house with a wine cellar, a barber shop, all to code without any formal education. I didn't know that he never forgot where he came from and often had field workers over for dinner. Because I was Mexican, I was confused because I never understood why I didn't look or act like the rest of my family, like my mother's family, like the white culture that I was told I was born of. While my mind can sort of see how challenging it must have been for my maternal family to admit that non-white blood had slipped into the family tree during a time when miscegenation laws might have prohibited it, still, having part of who you are ripped away can do funny things to a person. It made me all the more passionate about reclaiming who I was, who I am, who my father was. Upon my genetic discovery, I was thankful that if nothing else, my children had grown up surrounded by nuances of their stolen culture through their friends, their uncle's wife, and certain businesses. For myself, I had spent over 30 years teaching second language learners, was welcomed by their families, had a few Mexican boyfriends, and had learned to make tortillas. But that wasn't enough to help me understand who I was, who the mysterious people were who lived within my bones. So I connected with newfound relatives, asked lots of questions, joined online research and educational groups, cried a lot, prayed, and wrote poetry. And so that's who I am. I'm a little different.
I can see that. You somehow are talking, because you talked about your background, and part of it was mentoring. And I see that you talked about the Black background here. So how does that resonate for you in this poetry?
You mean with the children that I've worked with?
Well, what spoke to you that you felt needed to come forth here?
Oh, that I needed to write this?
Yeah.
I think frustration and anger that my friends, people who are homeless, people who weren't white, were being seen in a very flat, stereotypical way, when I found the community to be in many ways greater, not less than those who have a great deal of money. I found the community to be very compassionate and empathetic and creative and fun and just, I guess we don't have a lot of money here. I am poor, and so that resonates with me. My daughter and I, we don't have much money. And so for mentoring, I would like for my children, I can't imagine how anybody, you mentioned how would it affect me? Well, how could anybody rip one of the children that I have had the immense privilege of spending hours and hours with from their homes? These are, in my opinion, I don't mean to sound racist, but these are the most beautiful children on earth. I don't even know. So I felt that I wanted to write and present a different side, the opposite side of the stereotype.
Could you repeat that? You want to write?
I wanted to write the opposite side of the stereotype, one that showed who we really are in Fresno and who we really are as a community if we don't have enough money, and who we are if parents work in the fields, things like that.
So you write in different ways. You have stories, okay, but you wrote this in poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Why poetry?
Well, I guess because poetry is my heart. I tend to think in poetry. A lot of times if I'm relaxed enough, I think in poetry, I pray in poetry, I dream in poetry. I often will break into poetry and metaphor and stuff. It makes sense to me. It was a very organic way for me to try to express what I saw. Poetry is great too, because you've got the snippet. You don't have to go into a lot of detail. I could cover, you mentioned it covering, it was a pretty broad attempt at covering some things in Fresno. In poetry, you can do that. I think you can do that more than you could in a book, in a novel, in prose. And because I think poetry goes for the heart a little more, and I wanted to communicate my heart. I wanted to communicate the people's heart that I know, and I was hoping to touch maybe other people's hearts as well.
How do you do your poetry?
How do I do it?
Yeah.
Oh, like, do I write every day or that kind of a thing?
Well, you were, the way you observed the reality that you also lived. But how does that become poetry then? Like, do you have a process or?
I think my main process is living and praying. Honestly, I am known.
I just want to stop you there.
Oh, yes.
Praying.
Yes.
And I noticed that praying comes out also in the various descriptions of your work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In what way praying?
In what way?
Yeah.
I guess talking to God. I do that. I'm not religious in the sense that I go to church. I like to walk barefoot in my yard in different places.
Mm.
And I could be anywhere just praying. I mean, I might, when you're quiet, be praying right now. It's just like, God is somebody who has been there for me when so many people haven't. And so, yeah, he means everything to me. And so I pray, and sometimes just things come to my heart. I'm very much impressed with maybe the crisis with ICE. And I pray. And then if I feel impressed more than to write a poem, then I go ahead and do that. And I even pray in the middle of poetry, which I know sounds really different. But if I feel like I don't know what to write, I'll say, what, how do I communicate this? And so it's just kind of a constant thing for me. And as far as like, do I have a schedule? I don't have any schedule. I write on my phone. I don't write on my laptop. Everything is really kicked back, laid back with me. I've been said to be overly sensitive. I don't believe that anymore. But that's why I said that for me, a lot of it is just living, because things tend to affect me very deeply. And then if it affects me too much, I have to write a poem. Or I will just keep pacing.
So you seem to take care of a, is it a garden or what is it?
Oh, meadowlark?
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt called in prayer to rewild our yard. My daughter and I did, so that the birds and the bees and everybody around us that isn't human would have a place to live, because they don't. I mean, they do so well, bless their hearts. You see them running around on telephone wires and houses and in between people trying to kill them with pesticide, but they need a place where that's not going to happen. And so that's what we do here at Meadowlark. And it's a food forest as well, so that we can go out and we can pick and eat and just, I guess, make a smaller footprint on the earth, and so that the animals can do that as well. And my daughter loves foraging, so she goes out and just forages.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
You have a beautiful poem here to end the collection, and either you or your daughter maybe would like to read that poem, because it's about the animals that you talk about.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to ask my daughter to,
Okay.
because this is one of her favorite poems that I've written. So I'd like her to be able to read it.
Okay.
Thank you.
The poem is, yeah, we have to finish up pretty soon, so maybe we can just read the second half of the poem.
Okay. The poem is Hummingbirds on Wind, and it ends, and we will rise and wing again and rise above the sieves again. Hummingbirds on Wind.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Stephanie.
Thank you. It was wonderful meeting you. And thank you so much.
Beautiful reading. Thank you.
Comadres.
Thank you so much.
Gracias, comadres. Our second interview is Jose Hernandez Diaz, a 2017 NEA Poetry Fellow. He is the author of The Fire Eater, Bad Mexican, Bad American, The Parachutist, Portrait of the Artist as a Brown Man, and the forthcoming The Lighthouse Tattoo. He has been published in Best American Poetry, Best American Non-Required Reading, and in Best Microfiction. He has taught creative writing at the University of California at Riverside and at the University of Tennessee, where he was the poet in residence. Interviewing Jose is Iago S. Cura, a public librarian in South Central Los Angeles and owner of Hinchas Press. Iago runs the Miriam's Garden Reading Series at the Miriam Matthews Hyde Park Branch in Nipseyland. In 2020, Iago contributed a chapter, Miguel, to Libraryland, It's All About the Story. In 2019, Iago was interviewed by Stacy Russo for her book, A Better World Starts Here, Activists and Their Work. In 2018, Iago published Hoisting the Disenfranchised Over the Digital Divide in South Central Los Angeles, in the anthology Poet Librarians in the Library of Babel, Innovative Meditations on Librarianship. He lives in the South Bay with his wife and 2 kids. Take it away, compadre.
Hola, gracias. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for that that introduction. I'm honored to be here today interviewing Jose Hernandez Diaz. And so what we're talking about is really Jose's new book. Sorry, I got a weird filter on and his portrait of the artist as a brown man. Thank you, Comadres, for sending me out a copy. Thank you, Jose, for writing it. It was an engaging book, and I look forward to these questions. And Jose, would you like to say anything before we start?
No, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite. Excited to talk about poetry and this book.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I do want to disclose that you and we know each other from the poetry community in Los Angeles. And like I gotta say, it's so cool to see you publish that prose poem in the nation, and like just really the success, the NEA grant has really looks great on you, and I'm glad that you're writing these books and doing this writing. So without further ado, let's just kind of jump into it. Jose, I've noticed that your book has 4 parts. Are they more like quadrants or more like seasons? Like, what was your thinking with the 4 parts? Was it just something organic? What was your thinking behind that, or how did you get there?
Yeah, the first section of the book is primarily odes, and the odes we're talking about sort of the climate right now, where Latinos are often scapegoated and surveillance and ridiculed, and instead of that negative light, I wanted to write odes that celebrated our culture and our people, and sort of in the mundane, kind of in the spirit of Neruda with the elemental odes. So that's why a lot of my odes are like to everyday images in my community. For example, Ode to the Piñata, Ode to Agua de Jamaica, which are like everyday images in the community. So that's the first section. The second section is also linear verse poetry, but they're not odes, and they're less talking about the political climate and more just, I have love poems. I have poems about visiting Mexico the last time I went over there. And so just autobiographical linear verse in the second section. The third section are prose poems with an experimental edge to it, kind of in the spirit of Portrait of the Artist of a Young Man by Joyce, who the book has a nod to. So they're experimental prose poems. And the last section are also experimental prose poems, but written in the beginning of the COVID era, and often written in the third person with the character, the man in the MF Doom shirt. So it kind of separated it organically with those 4 sections. And most of my books are split up like that, with the linear verse in the beginning. Actually, all of my books, except for The Fire Eater, which is all prose poems. So the first section's linear verse, and then the second half, prose poetry.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. Like for me, some of the experimental ones that were howlers, that I was reading this, and like howling is like this summer I was good friends with Salvador Dali and Diego Maradona. I particularly love, just because, soccer, football, it's beautiful. And yeah, so maybe I was gonna ask this a little later, but if we're talking about the prose poem and and you are king of the prose poem, you know, I got a real strong feeling after reading the work to Max Jacob, right? And then even like Russell Edson, right? Are you fans of theirs? Like they, you know, they had a period where they wrote copious prose poems, right? Are there occurrences of their work in yours? What kind of inspirations, aside from Neruda, right, for the prose poems, what was your
Yeah.
inspiration?
Well, Neruda was more for the ode, but with the prose poem, definitely Russell Edson was an early influence. Jacob, I kind of knew more of as a painter, but I didn't really, I wasn't too familiar with the prose poetry. But James Tate was a big influence. Moroso de Giorgio from Uruguay, Ray Gonzalez, Chicano author, and Richard Garcia. Um, so a lot of those prose poets, you know, initially I was writing linear verse, personal, autobiographical, political, often about SB 1070. This was like 2015. And after a while, I kind of felt like I was writing the same poem over and over. And I went to the library actually. And at the time, I was not reading male white authors just because of the, you know, the history in the canon and, you know, the dominance. So, but I did see Tate's book there in the corner, and it had like a surreal painting on the cover, and that spoke to me. You know, it looked like Dali, and I started reading it, and it was what turns out to be prose poetry, which I was not familiar with. And this is 2015 during graduate school when I was taking a semester off, and so I realized there was no line break, and it was written in paragraphs, and which are relatively not intimidating and accessible, and compared to line breaks, which can be confusing, and stanza, and when you're starting off. And so that opened my eyes to prose poetry and third person, and it didn't have to be first person confessional, which I still write, as you can see you know, in the beginning of my books. So my style is kind of split between the personal, autobiographical, linear verse, which is often in the beginning of the book, maybe odes and maybe, you know, dedications to family and my parents and my abuelitas, and autobiographical, and then the other inspiration with the prose poetry like Edson, and yeah, experimental, surrealism, dream logic, and associative leap, spontaneity. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I really love how like when I read your work, I get this idea of the subject and the object kind of blurring. Like sometimes the object is a microscope and sometimes the subject is a telescope, and it just kind of zooms in and out. And that's kind of what I like about it. And like I said, the Russell Edson, where it's just like, yeah, a man with MF Doom shirt walks through the forest, you know what I mean? Or so it's really great stuff. Let me ask you this. I really enjoy the fact that you're teaching now, working with students in Tennessee. I think it's super important. In fact, I tell all the writers in LA, if you meet a poet in LA and they don't have a day job, you should run the other way. So we all need that job. We all do some kind of teaching. We all kind of help students in our own way. And I was so happy to see you grappling with that, wrestling with that, you know what I mean? Because I've gone that route, and it's challenging, you know what I mean? But it's also, I think, very fulfilling. You talked a little bit about what drew you to prose poems. Jose, how do you teach new writers to not feel daunted by the prose poem and the history that it has? Do you have any special techniques? I mean, so
Yeah, no,
obviously
I think,
Tate is a good person, Edson, right? But do you have a technique for teaching prose poems?
yeah, I've been teaching prose poetry for like 6 years now. And, you know, initially I had never taught a class before, and I was intimidated by it. And I needed money, and someone asked me to teach a class, and they would pay me. And, you know, I never saw English teachers who looked like me, uh, Latino males. My older sister was an English teacher in high school for many years. But so I was intimidated. I was kind of introverted at the time, but I needed the money, so I took it. And I was terrified the first time I did it. It was online. It was during the Zoom. I mean the
Pandemic? Yeah, yeah.
COVID epidemic, and I just got better, you know, over the years, trial and error. And the way that I found is that prose poetry is relatively loose and subversive, less intimidating than linear verse with no line breaks. You can just go down to the end of the page. And the major rule is no line break. So it has a conversational aspect to it. And, there's an essay by Charles Simic that I highlight in the workshop where he talks about the sprezzatura, which is sort of the nonchalance and the casual cadence of prose poetry, that when he wrote his book, The World Doesn't End, which won the first prose poetry collection to win the Pulitzer Prize, he said it was like the composition of the prose poems for him was like doodling cartoon doodles on napkins in a cafe. So just sort of this nonchalance, subconscious approach. And, I always tell people if poetry with the capital P is Michael Jordan, prose poetry is Dennis Rodman. You know what I mean? So you can be playful, you can be subversive, you can have this deadpan style. And so I just, the main thing we do is do close readings of established prose poets like Tate, like Etten, like DeGiorgio, and we read these examples, and then we discuss what's going on with the voice, the perspective. In prose poetry, there's not a lot of space, so you don't have a lot of room for backstory, and you kind of jump in there in this startling intro, and so it's kind of nonlinear and experimental. And I've had a lot of people that never have written poems or prose poems, for that matter, that kind of jump right into it with this. I think I try to encourage people to feel loose and a lack of pressure, trying this out. And so just over the years, the close readings has been effective, and working with prompts as well, where I can try to generate some work with the students. And that's why I kind of write so much, is because I tend to write with the workshops as well.
Jose, and I was thinking about it today, how kind of beautiful and clunky like prose poems are, right? Would you say a prose poem is a warehouse, a bodega, or a refuge? If you had to pick, I'm making you pick. Which one would you pick? Warehouse, bodega, or a refuge?
I would say that it's all three of those at the same time, and a prose poem, for me, it's a condensed hybrid space that is not big on definition and exactitude, and it's more about gray areas and genre bending and inclusive, as opposed to definitive classification and strict rules. So I think that's what spoke to me about it. When I was a younger man, I was really into indie rock and roll and underground hip hop. Whatever it was, it had to be something that was not mainstream and corporate and just interested more in big business. So I want authenticity, and that's kind of what prose poetry is to me. It's less interested in the publication is never the goal. If it happens, that's fine, but it's more about world building, experimental approach, and discovery. When I go in there, I'm not planning usually what I want to write about. I'm usually working with spontaneity and discovery and associative leaps and trying to keep the reader on their toes. So there's a lot of elusive quality to it.
Yeah, there's one of the poems where you write about watching the gymnasts and like the Immortal Technique song, and how like one thing makes you kind of, it's like I thought it was me going through menopause, but I do think that there's times where like the things that you see are so beautiful and they strike you with such beauty, that the only response is kind of tears. I forget which one it was, but it was a great poem. It really kind of hit me. Like, wow.
Oh yeah, it was the last time I cried, and it was more about when you in art appreciation, sometimes art is so beautiful that it can bring tears to your eyes. So something like that, like a great Rachmaninoff piano song or something like that, where the beauty of the art, or in a movie that you're watching, that it's such a powerful scene, and maybe the actors are just really into it, and it can be so beautiful that it makes you bring tears to your eyes. So.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And I'm all for that. I really enjoyed those kind of like surprises, those discoveries. I enjoyed you using Salvador Dali and Diego Maradona. I enjoyed you writing odes to like the chicken burrito spot where, you know what I mean? Like, because those are all like, I don't think people realize how important those places are. You have an ode to Jamaica, right? And you know, like Jamaica is super important out here, but in New York, we know it as sorrel, right? A lot of my Caribbean friends that I played soccer with was like, "Oh, you mean sorrel?" And so, like, even there's like this kind of like beauty behind even the things that we all use. Jose, I have a serious kind of and tongue-in-cheek question. How the hell did you write an anti-ice ode without mentioning ice one time?
Well,
It's
the funny thing is,
amazing.
I wrote this poem like 2022, before the raids were happening last year. So, um,
And it's lovely. You don't like I said, CBP. Look, it's not I'm not saying you're not an advocate. You're definitely an advocate, but I'm saying it's not political in its mean. It's not political in its demeanor. It's really a lovely poem, and it says more about the importance of like subtext. You know, what's not said, the reading between the lines. Um, I think it's fantastic. I think it's one of the standouts. And it's one of the great odes. I really enjoyed it. Um, can you talk to us a little bit about the difference between like looking and seeing as you write odes? Like, can you, because you could look at something for a while and not really see it, right? And then the ode is like this kind of stripped down, kind of just beautiful aesthetic statement on singularity of the object, right? How long does it take for one to see that? You know what I mean? Is it sometimes instantaneous or does it take a time?
yeah, I think the philosophy for my odes are in celebration and in gratitude. I think a lot of my work can have more experimental and heavier existential aesthetic. So I think the ode, in contrast, is a little more celebratory and a little more working in gratitude, celebration, homage, and So I think the book, I wanted to have that contrast with the beginning, was more, you could say, positive or celebratory, and taking different turns in each section.
Jose, I noticed the second poem is called Hey, and then the last poem is Hey. So in a way, the collection is kind of encapsulated between these two poems, right? So there's like the four chapters, but then I feel like there's an overarching kind of order there as well, right? And I guess I was just curious myself because I'm always thinking about the craft of it, right? Like, did you impose the order while you were paginating, or did you knew that you were going to use these two? Like, is Hey one poem that you cut in half, or was it two poems that you wrote and said, "Man, I got to use this as sandwich bread, as bookends. This is how I
Yeah,
want to
that's a
say it."
great, yeah, great question. No, actually, during that poem was written during COVID, when there was kind of like a Twitter trend when people would say, "Hey," and like it was a desperate time to connect with other people. So you would just say, "Hey," and then say things so forward, like, "Hey, I never met you, but I'm in love with you." Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like desperation to connect. So that was the theme. And it actually started as literally Twitter posts that I wrote, and they got like hundreds of likes. And I was like, I think this is a poem if I put into couplets. And
Yeah.
that's kind of how I had two of those, because I wrote two posts, kind of being tongue in cheek, like you're talking about earlier, with this idea of, um, it's talking about being isolated and wanting to break free from capitalism consumption and going to independent bookstores instead. And so that's kind of where that came from, was this desire to connect and break free from isolation of the COVID era.
Can you talk a little bit about like the cover of the book and where you got the image and what made you, or did you have any say, was that just red hand, like we're gonna design the book and send it to you, or were you like, I'd really like to use this image? How did that work?
No, yeah, the cover is the local artist from City of Industry, and she does a lot of lowrider art, painting on the actual cars, but also does canvas work. And I really liked a lot of her canvases. And I went on the website and I said maybe I could find one that fits the portrait theme, you know. And I searched so many of her paintings, and they were all great. And but then this one kind of looked like more of a portrait, and it was more. There's more in the painting, but this is kind of the condensed, zoomed in version of the painting. And yeah, it turns out it's her uncle, her Theo, in the painting. So
Nice.
people ask me if it's me all the time, but it's not.
So Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, right, is 1916, right? And then we have Dylan Thomas's, right, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Dog, that's 1940, right? Do you see this collection more like a coming of age, like a Bildungsroman, or more as like I got the word here, a Kunstelroman, where it's just like an artist delineating their aesthetic? Is this more like what would you
Yeah,
say?
maybe more like the second one. The first time I heard it was Talib Kweli. He has a rap song, and he says, "Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man." And I always assumed that was his words, and then I found out it was a novel. And I like the stream of consciousness of Joyce's novel, the experimental, non-linear vibes, and the coming of age aspect of it, and also just how art was sort of the central theme to it, with family also at the forefront. But I didn't want it to be exactly like indebted to, some people tell me like specific things about the novel, and I'm like, well, it's not necessarily completely parallel with it. It's a little bit on its own. I just really like the title. But when I heard that Talib Kweli reference, I said, I like that. I would like that if I ever wrote a book to put Portrait of the Artist as a brown man instead of young man. So it's not exactly coming of an age, but some of it, a lot of my writing is still influenced by that as well.
That's fantastic, man. Yeah, it's I imagine, teaching English in Tennessee comes with challenges. Like the first poem, where the person mistakes you for the janitor. Like I went to grad school in the in the Northeast too, and so it can be, Tennessee's not in the Northeast, but you get my drift. It's fraught with pitfalls, right? And you have to be careful. And working for the university, sometimes people just assume you have to look a certain way, and a lot of people don't conform to that. Um, I was gonna ask you whether you found it daunting to kind of write towards or against two titanic kind of pieces of literature, but you just answered that, and I'm kind of glad that you didn't let it become too daunting, like, of a task. I'm glad that you kind of used it sparingly, like the kind of order of those two. But I do also like that you do talk about your family as a part of not just your identity, but like your struggles as an artist and as a brown man. I think all those things are super important. Um, let's see. You know, I guess the only thing, is there something that you left out that you wish you had put in? Is your new collection a continuation of this collection, or is it kind of like a clean break, would you say?
The lighthouse tattoo
Yes, sir.
is there's still continuation there, but a little bit. I would say it's a little bit different. This one had the central theme of the odes in the beginning, kind of uniting it. This one has less of that, but there is still family and celebration, and some of it still with the COVID era as well, and definitely prose poems, which I'll probably always write. But I think there's definitely both similarity and difference. In I think I'm always going to be interested in prose poetry and world building, dream logic, and a third person persona, and but every poem is different, and I tend to take it poem by poem, day by day, as opposed to like mapping it out. But this new one does have a a recurring character, the man in the Salvador Dali for President shirt, and then it ends with the man in a Kafka for President shirt. So those two series are the end of the collection. And other than that, I have a little bit more prose poems and then autobiographical in the beginning as well, where I have a poem called Ni de aquí, ni de allá, ni de la pinche luna. And sorry for my bad words. So there's still some of everything, you know, involved there, with whether it's identity and family and being Mexican American, Chicano, bilingual, bicultural, and so there's kind of a lot in there which I kind of use to separate with the distinct you know, chapters or you know, sections.
And last question, Jose, do you consider yourself a Chicano writer, a Chicano poet? Would you say yo soy un poeta chicano?
Well, I mean, I don't know why not. I mean, I'm Mexican American. I was born here, but my parents were born in Mexico. So I think even if I didn't consider myself for some reason, I'm definitely Chicano, or I tend to use Mexican American more. I feel like Chicano is a little more for the era of the Renaissance, Chicano Renaissance, and the activist era. So I use them interchangeably. If someone calls me Chicano, Mexican American, that's fine with me. If they say Jose or Jose, I don't lose sleep over things like that. You know, I grew up between American and Mexican culture, where I hear Spanish, I hear English, and that's kind of been the background of my life. So.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, guys, it's 5:56. I don't want to go over, and I don't want to overstay my welcome. It has been fantastic to ask you these questions, Jose. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot. I appreciate how you answered. I appreciate your trajectory and all the great work you're doing. And please, man, continue the great work. I'm waiting to read the Lighthouse Tattoo when it comes out.
My pleasure. Thank you for the great questions.
And Tess, go ahead. Sorry.
Hi. We thank you very much, everyone. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to authors Kimberly and Jose, and to their publishers, Green Writers Press and Red Hen Press, for generously donating books to our early registrants. Special thanks to our incredible interviewers, Comadre Mireya and Yago. We appreciate our audience for joining us tonight and submitting thoughtful questions. Most importantly, we want to recognize our dedicated volunteers, without whom this book club and associated work would not be possible. Mil gracias. Supporting Latina authors is crucial to our mission. We encourage you to write reviews on platforms like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Nobles, and these reviews significantly impact publishers and potential readers. Consider purchasing books to directly support our authors, and if your local library lacks a title you're interested in, don't hesitate to request they order one. We invite you to attend our virtual local book club meetings and bring friends along. Remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos. All are welcome. Looking ahead, our May books are The White Hot by Chiara Alegria Hudes and After the Ocean by Lauren Rico. Thank you all for your continued support of Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. Please join us in celebrating Las Comadres and Friends by buying books and supporting Latine authors. Let's applaud and amplify diverse literary voices throughout the year. Good night, and always read Latino Lit. Thank you.